So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Book Club of California's in-person and online program titled Doctors, Distillers, The Remarkable Medicinal History of Beer, Wine, Spirits, and Cocktails. Thank you for joining us here in person or out there on Zoom. My name is Kevin Kosick, and I'm the Executive Director for the Book Club of California. And it's my pleasure to welcome you and host this evening's program. Tonight, we have more than 125 people registered to join us on Zoom, and we have about 30 folks, I think, who've registered to attend in person. So for those of you who might be new to the book club, we are a nonprofit member and donor supported organization that is dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of the book and the book arts. Oftentimes, we do that with a focus on the history and the literature of California and the West. The book club publishes limited edition books, a scholarly journal, and keepsakes. We host a year-round series of exhibitions and programs like the one this evening on topics including fine printing, design, typography, bookbinding, collecting, and much, much more. Now, if you're not a member of the book club or if your membership has lapsed and you're interested in what we do, please consider joining our century-long tradition. Our membership dues are modest. The benefits are many, and we simply can't do the work of the book club without the support of our members and our donors. So I encourage you to visit us online at bccbooks.org to join or to donate to the Book Club of California. Now, if you're here in the club rooms, or if you're on Zoom, you're seeing a slideshow of some of the ephemera related to tonight's topic. Again, the remarkable medicinal history of beer, wine, and spirits and cocktails from Doctors and Distillers, the book by our speaker, Camper English. I'm going to be pausing or stopping the slideshow that is rotating right now so you can see our speaker when you're out there on Zoom. And in the audience here, I'm going to turn off the screen so you can focus on the speaker instead of trying to read all of the very interesting advertisements that are coming by you on the screen. So for tonight's program and our presenter, again, the program is titled Doctors and Distillers, The Remarkable Medicinal History of Beer, Wine, Spirits, and Cocktails. And our presenter is Camper English. Camper English is a cocktails and spirits writer and speaker who has covered the craft cocktail renaissance for over 15 years, contributing to more than 50 publications around the world, including Popular Science, Civer, Details, Whiskey Advocate, and Drinks International, with a focus on what he calls the nerdy side of mixology. Camper has studied everything from the history of carbonation to the science of clear ice cubes, which is the subject of his next book. He has been awarded the International Cognac Writer of the Year by the Bureau of National Interprofessionnel du Cognac, the best cocktail writer at the Tales of Cocktail Spirited Awards. He has multiple websites, including alchemists.com, cocktailsafe.org, and cocktailgreen.org. Now, Camper's book, titled Doctors and Distillers, The Remarkable Medicinal History of Beer, Wine, Spirits, and Cocktails, is the subject of tonight's presentation. Now, in 1948, when Samuel Brannan shouted, "Gold, gold, gold from the American River," the precious metal he was waving around was stored in quinine bottles. Malaria, scurvy, and plague all impacted the young city of San Francisco, and many of the recommended treatments for each came in beverage form. The city's most fashionable bar, located in the site of the Transamerica Building today, served a drink made with Peruvian brandy, perhaps laced with a bit of cocaine, which was described by Rudyard Kipling as compounded of the shavings of cherub wings, the glory of tropical dawn, the red clouds of sunset, and the fragments of lost epics by dead masters. Alcohol and medicine have an intertwined history, with innovations in each altering the path of each other. And this story actually stretches back to ancient times when beer and wine were used to provide nutrition and hydration, and were employed as solvents for healing botanicals. And modern cocktails like the old-fashioned, the gimlet, and the gin and tonic were born as remedies for diseases and discomforts. So tonight, cocktail and spirits expert Camper English will start locally, and he'll think globally about diseases and conditions treated by alcohol-based medicine. And he will reveal how and why the contents of our medicine and our liquor cabinets were, until surprisingly recently, one and the same. Now, if you're out there on Zoom and you have questions for our speaker, please use the chat and the Q&A function. We should have time at the end of the hour to take questions, and we'll curate those questions from the Q&A and the chat on Zoom. And if you're here in the audience, we'll also take questions from you. So let me stop this share, and you can turn off the projector. So now the people on Zoom should be able to see the speaker at the podium, which will soon be my good friend. Speaker tonight is cocktail and spirits writer, Camper English. Woo! That was a long intro. I know, I'm out of breath. It's all yours.
Thanks for eating up some of my time, so I don't have to talk quite as long. Because mostly now that we don't have a screen to read behind us, it's just me talking, and I'm going to do that for the next at least half an hour or so, and then I'll stop, and then we can have more cocktails and go from there. Folks in the room, because we have people online, will save questions to the end. But if you can't hear me, or if you can't hear a term that I'm using, let me know, because I'm sure people online will be having similar struggles understanding what the heck I am talking about. So without further ado, for this book, I'm a cocktails and spirits writer, and I just noticed that there was a lack of a tale from olden times to new times about the history of alcohol and medicine. Thank you. Big glass of Pisco there. I got really interested in the history of the gin and tonic. And if you want to know about the history of tonic water, you have to study the history of malaria, because the quinine in tonic water is a preventative and cure for malaria. And if you study cocktails, you quickly figure out that they're not very well documented, and because people are drinking, it's fair. And but the history of medicine is very well documented. And so I decided I was going to find a better background and information on the creation date of the gin and tonic by reading medical histories of malaria. And I got really into it, and I read a good 10 books to start. And it turns out people who are interested in the history of malaria don't care when the gin and tonic was created. So I never found a single bit of new information about the gin and tonic, but I did learn a lot about the history of medicine. Malaria is a very old disease. It may have impacted the dinosaurs, and we haven't eradicated it around the world. It's still very problematic. And but that really got me into the history of medicine. And I found that alcohol was involved, not just, we know a few things, all of us here, like quinine for malaria and citrus for scurvy, both of which I'll talk about tonight, and maybe whiskey on snake bites in the American Wild West. But it turns out alcohol is there in the history of medicine everywhere along the way. It's 100% integrated into that history, but we tend to think of medicine good, alcohol bad, and not alcohol directly is medicine, or alcohol is useful in medicine, which is the reality. And so I found that exploration of not just the malaria and the gin and tonic and quinine, but every spirit and every medicinal ingredient used with cocktails and spirits to be the subject for the book. And initially, what happened was I wrote it in chronological order, along with the history of medicine, essentially with the history of Western civilization, from people who build the pyramids through modern times. But I had intended to go ingredient by ingredient and look at just whiskey, what did that do? And just quinine, what did that do? But I found I would have to retrace too much information in each chapter and wrote it chronologically. Today, we don't have those restrictions, so I'm just gonna talk, it's not totally at random, but kind of. I'm using the themes from the book that took place in California at some time, and then kind of look at the worldview of those. So with no further ado, those of you in the room tonight may have tried a cocktail that we had brought and prepared, and that cocktail was the Pisco Punch. The Pisco Punch is a drink made with Pisco, which is a grape brandy that's unaged and comes from Peru, with pineapple syrup and some citrus, lemon or lime in that. And if you've heard of only one Pisco drink, it's probably not the Pisco Punch. It's probably the Pisco Sour, which is indigenous to Peru and is really just a Pisco version of a whiskey sour at the end of the day. But the Pisco Punch was actually the most famous drink in San Francisco by a lot. There's never been a drink as famous as the Pisco Punch even since, and I'm talking in the modern era when the Irish coffee at the Buena Vista is probably if you send your tourist friends to have one cocktail in San Francisco, send them to the Buena Vista for that delicious Irish coffee. But in the years around 1900 through Prohibition, that drink was absolutely the Pisco Punch. And the place that you sent them to get the Pisco Punch was the Bank Exchange Saloon. The Bank Exchange Saloon was a famous bar. As mentioned, the drink was commented on by Rudyard Kipling, but also by Mark Twain and many other famous people who visited San Francisco in this era. And they had a lot of great things to say about the drink. The Bank Exchange Saloon was in a building called the Montgomery Block. And the Montgomery Block was in place all the way until, I think, 1950 or so, when it was torn down. 61.
Mommy tore it down.
And it tore down in 61, thank you, and became a parking lot for a brief period. And now it's where the Transamerica Pyramid is located today, only a few blocks from where we are for those of us here in the room together. And it was the superlatives hoisted upon this drink included not just that it was compounded of the shavings of cherub wings, but also a lot of people spoke to how supposedly intoxicating it was, that it would make a gnat fight an elephant, and that it had a buzz in the region of bliss between hashish and absinthe. And so for those of you who had one, I don't feel like we're there. Like, I'm not really ready to fight any of you. We'll see. The night is young. Maybe I have a couple more. But so why was this drink with just syrup and citrus and a base spirit considered so strong? Well, we don't actually know the real recipe for the Pisco Punch, because probably not the originator, but the person who popularized the drink at the Bank Exchange Saloon took the actual recipe to his grave in the 1920s during Prohibition, is when he died, and has left no recipe behind. So many people think that there was a secret ingredient or ingredients in the cocktail. And what one of the premier Pisco scholars, studies Peru and San Francisco, Guillermo Torreliras, believes is that ingredient was cocaine added to the drink, which you could see maybe making a gnat fight an elephant if you had cocaine in the drink, or that it was between hashish and absinthe. Supposedly you were only allowed to have a couple of these drinks in one setting at the bar. This trick is used a lot throughout cocktail history. We're kind of used to it now. But the drink was reputedly very strong and intoxicating. The cocaine theory comes from several reasons. One is that Pisco comes from Peru. Coca leaves are also quite easy to gather in Peru, and ships that sailed to San Francisco. The Panama Canal, I don't believe, was finished until 1918, but all the ships before then would come around the tip of South America, stopping along the coast of South America along the way, including the port of Pisco, where they would pick up Pisco and possibly coca leaves as well. perhaps those were infused into the pisco to make it extra strong. Now, cocaine was used in a lot of drinks back in circa 1900 and the years before. It was thought to be just a regular medicinal ingredient to be used in all sorts of ways. The most famous drink with cocaine was Vin Mariani. There was a slide up earlier that may have scrolled past. Vin Mariani was a heavily advertised tonic wine, a wine with medicinal properties. And it was developed in 1863 as a luxury health tonic. It was a wine with, I believe it was sweetened and fortified, but it had coca leaves infused into it. And it was recommended in the advertising that it fortifies and refreshes body and brain. It restores health and vitality. It hastens convalescence, especially after influenza, and may be given indefinitely, never causing constipation. And it is especially adapted on account of its nice taste for children. So Vin Mariani was cocaine wine for kids. And it was people who appeared in ads for this, I don't know if they knew that they were in the ad or not necessarily, included two popes, Thomas Edison, Queen Victoria, Jules Verne, and the actress Sandra Bernhardt. The ads were kind of everywhere. You can find lots of archival ads for Vin Mariani, this French coca wine. Now, it was so popular that it spurred many imitation brands. And so we can find ads for Vin Mariani saying, trust no imitations, etc. And because there were so many. One of them, which was made in Atlanta, Georgia, was Pemberton's French wine coca. So it sounds a lot like this French cocaine wine. And if you know the name Pemberton, you know where this is going. So this cocaine wine was produced in Atlanta until 1886, when Atlanta made their own local prohibition on alcoholic beverages. And so Mr. Pemberton, who was the founder of this product, made a non-alcoholic version that was a soda syrup that was called Coca-Cola. So Coca-Cola is the non-alcoholic version of cocaine wine. And the story goes from there. The cocaine didn't last all that long in the recipe. It's been decocainized since the early 1900s, at least. But a lot of sodas that we know today didn't start out with cocaine in them, but they started as a product of doctors and pharmacists. Surprisingly, well, Dr. Pepper, maybe that's not a big surprise. It does have doctor in the name. Pepsi, which the name speaks to dyspepsia or upset stomach and how that could soothe it. Canada Dry ginger ale, and even Orangina was created by a pharmacist, that one in Spain. And so these sodas that were supposedly curative were served at soda fountains. And we think of them today as like that Happy Days, 1950s, you have a hot dog in your soda. But the soda fountain was the pharmacy of old. Pharmacies would serve soda water, which was considered healthy medicinal water. And the way you would take your medicine is with that soda water, often in the form of a sweetened syrup to cover the bitter taste of the medicine. And that forms all the sodas that we drink today. Now, this was the era of the patent medicine, medicines with cocaine in them, but also medicines with opium and cannabis, and a lot of American and imported herbs. Bitter things like quinine, we'll get into more of that later, as well as strychnine and iron. And actually, the combination of quinine, iron, and strychnine was very common in patent medicine. The definition of that is really, I think we all kind of have an idea what patent medicine is. It might be something in a small bottle that has over promises on what it's going to cure and might contain healthy or dangerous substances, often in a base of alcohol. What alcohol does for medicinal botanicals is it extracts them so that an herb that's in season for a short amount of time can be infused into alcohol, and the alcohol lasts throughout the year. It also will preserve those medicinal botanicals, and also just makes them liquid. So if you're drinking a bitter bark that's healthy, drinking it is a lot easier than chewing on a tree. So our patent medicines were heavily advertised medicines, usually with a base of alcohol, and come from the era before there were laws requiring you to have any truth in advertising in America in particular. Although patent medicines were common around the world. The cocaine patent medicines were usually recommended for anything to do with the mouth because it is a numbing substance. So there were cocaine drops for children to numb a toothache before you could get to the dentist. Cocaine was also used for sore throats, and then a lot of external numbing, such as against dandruff and to soothe sunburn, which seems kind of extreme to me, to rub some cocaine on that. I took a look at the many different patent medicines on the market that had alcohol in them and tried to put them in some categories to see what they were generally trying to cure. And I broke them down into different categories. A lot were for indigestion, and those would contain bitter ingredients. And we still have a lot of products on the market that we enjoy today that are very similar to those medicines. There were fever pills, things for chills and malaria, laxatives, nerve drugs to calm one. Those tended to be really high in alcohol, and vermifuges for intestinal worms. Wormwood would be the herb used most often for that. Cough and cold medicines, and drugs that were supposed to purify the blood and help with the liver and kidneys. And so those were the most common categories, I would call them, of the patent medicines. And the Smithsonian Institution has an online exhibit of American bitter products, and you can search through it. And it's really fascinating, some of the products and the names that they're given there. So we're looking now back to the Pisco Punch being the famous drink of San Francisco. It was known, and then during Prohibition, they were obviously not allowed to serve the drink anymore. But the years we're talking about are the early 1900s here. And the late 1800s and the early 1900s were a very important time in America in regard to medicine and alcohol, and also food safety. These were not considered separate issues, which I had no idea, no concept of before I wrote this book, that they were one and the same, basically ingestibles. And so there was a series of acts only around the year 1900 that clarified that you can't have false advertising and that you must state truthfully what is in a product. Surprisingly, they got to the whiskey before they got to the food supply in America. Considered to be one of the first consumer protection acts was the Bottled and Bond Act that allowed whiskey to be aged in government warehouses and to be guaranteed a certain level of quality and reputation. That was in 1897. The most important act was the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906. This took care of alcohol and food and medicines. The food at this time, milk could be laced with chalk to make it look white even after it was spoiled. This is the era of the canning industry had become big, and the slaughterhouses of Chicago, and that meat was put into cans and then preserved with things like formaldehyde to keep them fresh. Green peas were made green with copper sulfate and other copper substances. And this was all legal in America at the time because they didn't have the Pure Food and Drug Act yet. So right around, it was 1906 when this act was passed. There was really more of a false advertising law than it was anything else. Basically, you can't say pure and healthful if your green peas have copper sulfate in them, and can't advertise anything that was not true. A third act came, and that applied to whiskey again. That was the Taft decision of 1909, because they had forgot to define what whiskey was in American law. Until then, people were selling molasses-based spirits and calling them whiskey, but the Taft Act took care of that. And I think the Pure Food and Drug Act, this was, the 1906 one was the first of many laws that turned into the FDA as we know it today. And the fact that the same laws applied to food, to alcohol, which was often laced with all sorts of preservatives as well, and flavorants and adulterants, and medicines, which were overpromising on what they could do. To treat them all as the same is really something. I don't think we have that vision of alcohol and food as the same products, and medicine as well. A very important law. Now, in our cocktail that we had tonight, our Pisco Punch. So we didn't have our cocaine tonight. Sorry, everybody. We did have Pisco from Peru, and then we had a bit of citrus. And if we're looking at the history of cocktails and medicine, when we have citrus, we're curing scurvy. So congratulations, everyone. You do not have scurvy. Good job. What people in California did in the era of the Pisco Punch, well, a little bit before really, sometimes contract scurvy, usually on the way to California if they're traveling by wagon train over land, because they would be eating some version of basically sailor rations, hardtack bread over and over again, and no fresh ingredients. You can avoid scurvy by eating any fresh fruits and vegetables, and even grasses of many kinds. Anything green is going to help stave off scurvy. But the people on wagon trains would sometimes get it just about before they got to the Rocky Mountains. And at Fort Laramie, the doctor there made basically a plant sludge that they would give to people to help stop scurvy, the growth of scurvy in their systems there. And some of the gold miners also contracted scurvy. Now, scurvy, as I think we all know now, is the lack of vitamin C in the diet. It's not a disease, but to people practicing medicine, let's say in the 1600s and 1700s, it really looks like a disease. You come down with symptoms and you fall ill. In particular, for scurvy, the symptoms were super gross. The first thing that happens is the gums swell. One's breath turns like horribly rancid. Everyone comments on the bad breath of people with scurvy. The teeth start to fall out. Old wounds open up. Things that have been fixed for decades now are broken again. And there's a lot of lethargy and the people suffering from it. And it goes from there. You don't want it. Eat your vegetables, everybody, if you remember one thing tonight. Or continue to drink your Pisco Punch with that citrus in it. We think of scurvy as the disease of the sea from sailors who are on long voyages without fresh ingredients. But scurvy was contracted, as mentioned, with people traveling long distances without fresh food, but also in prisons and in within army camps, and any place under siege might the people there might suffer from scurvy as well. But a lot of vegetables that we can think of it do cure scurvy or prevent it. Potatoes are enough to keep you from getting scurvy, surprisingly. Today, I read this after I finished the book, but where a lot of vitamin C is extracted from is red peppers. It's not even citrus. Citrus is not the highest food in vitamin C. But the symptoms of scurvy, they looked a lot to doctors of the time, as it was considered a disease of putrefaction, as if someone was dying on the inside and rotting from the inside out. And because of that, the cures tended to treat that. I looked at the various cures for scurvy, and it took me a while to figure out what they had in common. So some common supposed cures included malt syrup. So basically a concentrated beer syrup that they knew would ferment, because this was thought that it was going to ferment in the stomach of the sailors. Horseradish was one. Sauerkraut turns out to have amazing history on its own. But sauerkraut actually may have helped the Dutch sailors from contracting scurvy because it has a little bit of vitamin C left in it. Vinegar was a very common thought to be cure for it, and soda water. So the person who invented the first artificial carbonating device was preemptively given the Copley Medal for curing scurvy because his device was really going to cure it. And I thought that was odd. And of course it doesn't, soda water doesn't cure scurvy, so it didn't work at all. And then of course citrus is the cure that works for scurvy. But what do all of these cures have in common? They are they have something to do with preservatives. A lot of them, the vinegar, the sauerkraut, the malt syrup in a way, or they're very acidic. And if you think of trying to stop rot on a corpse, you might add something acidic to it. And so those were the common threads throughout the potential cures for scurvy. And yet they weren't far off because citrus is the thing that does it, and that's pretty acidic there. Now, most of the studies on what was the cause and cures for scurvy were led by the Royal College of Physicians in Edinburgh in Scotland, people who were on the land kind of making decisions of the health of people at sea. So there was a bit of a lapse between the people who should have been treating the disease and people who knew what they were talking about. Because many ships captains for centuries were like, oh yeah, just stop and get some citrus and no one gets scurvy. They understood it, but it didn't fit in with the model of disease, which in the 16 and 1700s was still essentially Greek medicine based on the four humors, and that there was the miasma theory of disease, that you would catch a disease from essentially smelly air. All communicable diseases were thought to be caused by miasma for the most part. And so the doctors didn't really know what caused scurvy, but they did obviously eventually figure it out by the end of the 1700s. So when they did, around just before 1800, the ships were required to be provisioned in the British Royal Navy with lemons for the thing to prevent scurvy. But soon they switched from lemons to limes, because lemons were sourced often from the Mediterranean, from Italy, where limoncello is from, and was given to the soldiers. But in order to promote the interests of business people who were British citizens, some of them owned lime plantations in the Caribbean. So the official recommendation switched to being lemons for provisioning to limes, earning the British sailors the nickname by Americans as limeys. Because they favored limes to lemons. But it turns out, even though limes are more acidic than lemons, and both of those are more acidic than oranges, the vitamin C ratios go the opposite direction. Oranges have the most vitamin C, followed by lemons, followed by limes. So when the British Royal Navy switched to requiring limes, incidences of scurvy went up for a little bit until steamships came right after this and were a lot faster, and people weren't getting scurvy anymore at that point. But because ships were required to be provisioned now with lime juice, there was a need for something that would be a preserved form of lime juice, because limes, they're going to shrink and on the boat, and they take up a lot of space compared to lime juice. So people would boil the lime juice and create a rob, it was called, of lime juice. But boiling lime juice takes away the vitamin C. It's no longer effective for scurvy if you boil it. So that didn't work. And the person who solved that problem in that he found a way to preserve lime juice without adding a ton of alcohol, which is the only successful way before that, was a man named Lachlan Rose. And he had learned from how canning works that he could preserve lime juice in a certain way and bottle that up and provision the sailors. The Lachlan Rose is important because this survives today as Rose's lime juice cordial, the thing that's in every terrible bar, because it's no substitute for fresh lime juice as far as its quality in a cocktail. However, I'm going to give it some credit because it was originally a cure for scurvy for the British Royal Navy. So good job on Rose's lime juice. Now, if you've read about Rose's lime juice in literature, you've probably read it from the cocktail, The Gimlet, which was featured in Raymond Chandler's 1953 book, The Long Goodbye. That's set in Los Angeles, so I'm bringing in the California connection back to the scurvy. And the character in the book states that a real gimlet is half gin and half Rose's lime juice and nothing else. It beats Martini's Hollow. I'm not even going to say debatable. That's just not true. Like a gimlet with half Rose's lime juice. Like no, a martini is better. All the way around. So everyone who's had the Pisco Punch tonight is free from scurvy, but perhaps you have malaria. Well, as mentioned in the introduction, when the first announcement of gold in the American River was announced, the person who had gold in a bottle, it was reportedly a quinine bottle. And that fact really stuck out to me because quinine, as we know, treats malaria. And was there malaria in California? Yeah, there was a ton of malaria in California because malaria was all over the world by this point, roughly 1850. And it was only after massive worldwide spraying of things like DDT that malaria became extinct essentially in countries with good infrastructure and still exists in countries without it. But the quinine, I'm guessing this was a jar for pills of quinine because quinine was isolated from cinchona tree bark roughly 1820. And this was 1850. And one person who became famous for promoting and selling quinine pills was Dr. John Sappington, and he was a humanitarian, and he sold his quinine pills called Sappington's anti-fever pills and became very rich, and then gave away his recipe upon his death, which is just quinine and some flavorings. It wasn't all that complicated, but it was considered a great humanitarian in American history. It's also the great grandfather of Ginger Rogers, the Hollywood dancer. So it's a fun connection there. So why was all this quinine in use in America? Like malaria, yes, but that's not all that quinine was used for. Quinine was used against all fevers. It was everything's talked about fevers. It didn't just mean malarial fevers. And given the quality of drinking water until roughly 1900, everyone in the world kind of felt a little bit sick all the time, a little bit funny tummy and just a general level of fever. So it was thought that there was a great need for quinine in the world. And circa 1850, we find hundreds, if not thousands of products that contain quinine. I call it the electrolytes of 1850. We don't know what it really does, but it sounds healthy. Let's just put it in everything just to be safe. Quinine was, we know it today is in tonic water. That didn't really come until 1850s, roughly, born in England. But there are a lot of quinine wines on the market. We had talked about the Vin Mariani, the cocaine-laced wine, but there were other wines existing today like Dubonnet and Lillet Blanc, which are directly quinine wines. The reason they exist is to be a carrier of quinine. And we've, I think, largely forgotten that that's the birth of those spirits. Dubonnet was specifically supposed to be a more palatable way for people to take quinine for French soldiers fighting in Algeria in North Africa, where malaria was a very big problem. Lillet Blanc, which is a fortified white wine that's used in the Vesper Martini, for those James Bond fans out there, you'll know that that's in the book. But the original name of Lillet was Quina Lillet, Quina, quinine. It's very related. There's a lot of words that sound like quin or kin when they have quinine in them. Now it's an entire category of wines in Europe and in the United States. Furthermore, these bitter Italian liqueurs that are all around today, things like Campari and Fernet Branca and Bernal, Averna, and many others, hundreds of other products that were born in the 1800s, they all had quinine in them. They all still do have quinine in them. We've just stopped talking about that, but they have other herbs that are good for digestion. But quinine was there for fevers all along the way. And so it was a very important ingredient in San Francisco and around the world. Now, the gin and tonic actually comes together, as far as we know, because this is what got me started on this whole West. As far as we know, the gin and tonic comes together in India in roughly 1868 is the earliest reference that I eventually found, not in any of the books on the history of malaria, but by using just Google Books search. And I found a magazine about a horse race in India. And by that time, it was already a recreational beverage. I said, oh, we put a fiver on Polly, but she lost in the sixth. And so we all retired for brandy and soda and gin and tonics, etc. Clearly, this was not used for therapeutic reasons at the time, although tonic water was therapeutic strength at one time. Tonic water more comes out of the tradition of carbonated waters to mimic healthy mineral waters of the spas of Europe. As we think of water that people are drinking around the world, it's mostly coming from rivers, it's surface water, and that's not great to drink. Pathogens get in that stuff. But spring waters bubbling up from the earth have not been infected with anything necessarily. And the carbonated, naturally carbonated from volcanic steam, mineral waters were thought to be the healthiest water of all because it helps settle the stomach a bit, but they were ascribed all sorts of other properties. And so people would try to recreate this mineral water. It was thought to cure scurvy, as we talked about before, and people started adding things to it, both flavorings like lemons to make it taste good, and medicines like quinine too. So it was sort of semi-therapeutic, kind of like maybe the Gatorade of its day, that it's like you drink it because you want to drink it, but there's something good in it that you can use as your excuse. In India, malaria was a big problem, but people by this point would, in the 1860s, would be taking anti-malarial pills, which was purified quinine, but they would be drinking tonic water as well. And because it's the British, they traveled with gin, and naturally the two were a fit for each other. And that's why the gin and tonic is a delicious drink today. But after World War II, when people kind of settled down and went back to their home countries, the British really had a liking for tonic water and continued to drink it. But in America, it was more of an advertising campaign. Have this British drink, it's tonic water. Be just like the genteel Brits. And that's how it was advertised in America into the 1950s. Schweppes was the brand that spent a lot of money advertising this to make it a big deal. And it kind of became associated with this country club preppy lifestyle. And I don't know if anyone here remembers the official preppy handbook from like the early 1980s. Yeah. The gin and tonic is defined in the book as a beverage that you drink before, during, and after a game. Tennis, of course. So like many of the medicinal drinks mentioned tonight, there was a journey from being a purely medicinal beverage into a recreational one with some history associated with it of having been used in medicine at one point in time. And so in the cocktail books that came out in the 1850s, the writers of the era would warn against drinking too much tonic water because it was still therapeutic strength. And they would say, never have more. One of the great drinkers, Charles H. Baker Jr., he almost never recommended caution anywhere in his books, but he said you're going to stop at 3 or 4 gin and tonics because you're going to feel the effects the next day. He said your head would feel inflated like Ramses II réchauffé, like reheated the next day. Other people would describe it as, and the known symptoms of what's called cinchonism are tinnitus in the ears and pain in the extremities. And in the modern craft cocktail renaissance that I've been writing about, a lot of bartenders try to make all of their ingredients the original way and make them themselves to try to recreate original formulas. And so they would buy cinchona tree bark and grind it up and make a syrup and make their own tonic water. But along the way, some may have used a little bit too much of that quinine and that bark. And particularly those people testing recipes often came down with these same symptoms of cinchonism that was from the era of when tonic water was therapeutic in strength. Now it's regulated in bottled form anyway, and that's not going to either clear malaria or give you a hangover in the bottle strength that it is now. So on that note, I will finish up by saying we've talked about a number of commercial beverages and a number of cocktails tonight. And really the whole fun trick of reading Doctors and Distillers is that you can go through pretty much every ingredient in every cocktail and find a medicinal origin for it. And then it just becomes like a fun trivia exercise to drink a gin and tonic and be like, oh yes, the lime for scurvy, the tonic for malaria, even the gin was a diuretic. And to play that game, to look at every ingredient and every cocktail that we enjoy today for recreation does have a long and usually pretty fascinating history in medicine. So thank you for your time and attention. And I think it's time for questions.
Yeah, I'm going to come up here with you and get in a little frame for everybody here. We have a bunch of questions actually on Zoom, but we're going to start with a couple of questions here in the audience. So we'll go right here in the front.
What was the name of the character in the Schweppes commercials with the eye patch?
Mr. Whitehead.
Was it Mr.
Commander.
Commander Whitehead.
Whitehead?
Thank you.
It's Captain, but Commander.
You're correct. Commander Whitehead, thank you. And that was
Okay.
David Ogilvy, who is like advertising's most famous person in the world. He's responsible for that campaign.
Oh.
And my favorite ad of any booze-related ad is with Commander Whitehead. And it's a picture of him leaning over, someone's dining outdoors, and she's stirring a gin and tonic. And he grabs the woman's hand. And this is a print ad. The never swizzle Schweppes tonic. Schweppes swivels itself. I love that. And like how like rude.
We'll go over here in the audience.
Hi, my name is Ray. I was a chemistry geek in high school, and I've never lost that fascination with stories of ancient chemistry, alchemy, and the unknown origins of these discoveries. I have a bunch of questions, but I'm really curious. I've heard that airline pilots are cautioned about tonic water because one of the symptoms of cinchonism is blurred vision. Pilots need very acute vision for safety. And they say you can drink a measured amount, but watch out for tonic water.
That's fascinating. I've never heard that, but for sure, blurred vision is a symptom of cinchonism. I wonder, do you know if that's like old advice or that's modern advice?
Going way back, caution for commercial pilots and military pilots alike. Of course, pilots and alcohol are very famous. There's a whole movie Flight about an alcoholic commander and so on. But the dangers, of course, are very real. And
yeah, that sounds probably, I don't know how long the laws have been in place that the amount of quinine is limited in tonic water and other beverages in the United States and other countries. But I could see that particularly anywhere between the 1950s and 1980s being great advice.
a related question is, the original discovery must have been done by indigenous people in the Amazon and places where malaria was endemic.
Actually, I didn't mention that tonight, but this is one of the most amazing facts about quinine and cinchona trees. The trees are native to the mountains of Peru and Bolivia. There's skinny little trees that look like not very exciting looking, but as far as we know, there was no deadly malaria in the Western Hemisphere at all in 1630, when quinine was discovered to be the thing that prevents and cures malaria in the Eastern Hemisphere. It just so happens that the thing that cures the symptom of fever and chills cures the underlying cause of malaria from another continent. Really spectacular.
Yeah, well, malaria was a scourge in Venice. And
Rome specifically was really, the word comes from Rome, malaria, bad air.
yes,
They said it comes to Rome in summers and kills one. That's like one of the first definitions of malaria. And the people who could afford it would move to the hills, the windier hills outside of Rome in the summers, not knowing that it was mosquitoes spreading the malaria, but thinking it was the air, the swamp air that did it.
and that's the origin of the CDC. Was malaria was the disease that created the formation of the Centers for Disease Control, malaria epidemics.
That makes sense. I did not know that. I did know that the global spraying efforts for malaria, that was a worldwide organizational effort. And then it accidentally launched the environmental movement of today when Rachel Carlson wrote
Silent Spring.
Silent Spring, thank you, everyone, about the effect of DDT on birds and other animal life. So we got rid of malaria in a lot of the world, but it wasn't free of problems, obviously.
Bo, let's go here in the room.
Hi, you mentioned a lot about quinine and gin and tonics, but gin also has a lot of herbal ingredients. I think juniper berry is one of them, which also presumably have some sort of medicinal role to play.
Certainly, yes. There's pretty much every spirit gets associated with things that it cures. Often that's regional, but in terms of juniper, which is the only required ingredient in gin other than alcohol, juniper was long used specifically as a diuretic, but also with issues of the kidney and bladder. And it was an abortifacient at high doses, and was associated with a lot of very specific ailments that it would work for. And juniper was infused into beer before distilled spirits were created. It was infused into wine, and it's no wonder it wound up infused into spirits. We find that with a lot of our medicinal ingredients, including quinine and including wormwood and gentian and things like that. They go through every possible infusion into alcohol by the end of their lifespan.
Okay, we're gonna go to Zoom and then we'll come to more questions. Yeah, I don't, just relax. Because this is one of my favorite beverages, that's the old fashioned. There's a question, was the old fashioned supposed to have some particular health effect?
Oh my gosh. So yes. Well, the short version of this story is the name of the cocktail is what we know as the old fashioned today. The original cocktail was the old fashioned. It's spirits, sugar, water, and bitters. It's basically, and the bitters are medicine, directly stomach medicine to help soothe the stomach, particularly of hangovers, but not always. And it's sort of like taking a cosmopolitan and adding cough syrup to it. They took an existing drink, the sling, and added bitters to it. And now it's a medicinal hot cocktail. The old fashioned was originally a morning beverage, and it predates ice and cocktails. So it was served at room temperature, your glass of whiskey and sugar and bitters. Nothing sounds worse to me in the morning for a big drink like that. But the original old fashioned was in fact a spin-off medicinal drink.
Don't judge, that might be breakfast. So there is, well, this was an interesting question that is in the Q&A. This Grendel says, when I visited Peru, I remember hearing that you needed to chew the cocoa leaves with a basic substance called something I can't pronounce, lepita, in order to release the alkaloids that the plant is known for. What's that all about? Does that maceration in alcohol have the same effect? Know about that?
So it's literally alkaloid. It's lime.
No.
Calcium hydroxide.
Let's have a conversation. Speak up. Let's hear what you have to
Hey, I'm
say.
Doug at McDonald.
Yeah.
And essentially it's like a rock, right? And so you want something charcoal. What that does, it's the multiplier against the leaf within your salivary system, that then you can only have access to the full spectrum of chemicals that is within the leaf, right? So if you're not chewing it, right, you're not getting it all. If you're not having that rock, you're not getting all of it.
Got it.
What we call cocaine is a tiny little silo of what is in fact the, the amazing nature of the coca leaf itself, right? And so, yeah, so in Peru, you do two at once. You put a leaf here and you have a little rock here, and then it activates it, and you frankly, it just slowly comes into your system through your salivary glands, through your digestive system, right? And then that's where the energy, and I would say not any kind of intoxication or whatever, but exhilaration, it works in your endocrine system, something completely different, right? Shall we say?
Yeah.
So I hope that answers her question.
So I'm not sure we could hear that capture that on the microphone,
I see.
but the enhancement element of these other
She's right.
you're right.
Yeah, she's right.
You're right. Kendall, you're right.
It helps extract it.
It helps
Yeah.
extract it. So, yeah. We did have another question here in the room. Where was it? Yeah, you again.
I want to talk about, it's more of a
You
holistic
again, Doug.
question around. So Campaign thinks I'm Doug and McDonald. And by the way, if you haven't read this book, it's wickedly humorous. So I just want to pay Camper a compliment.
Well,
You
thank
are a
you.
ridiculous author, and thank you for your sense of humor. As the pages progress, like you get more and more, funny, and it's really awesome.
I did try
Yeah, I mean,
to be
we've known each other for a long time, and it gets more wicked, as you turn pages. So congratulations on that. It's really a great read. Thinking about what you're talking about with the FDA, okay, and it not only became a great sort of like the divide in our country. I feel I struggle with it, okay, and why I mention that is the United States is made up of many different cultural traditions, right? People from all around the world, ethnic traditions, etc. And we have, say, amaros, vermouths, chartreuse, liqueurs, etc. here, right? That were originally created and are still observed in those native countries as medicines.
Yeah.
But as of 1906, they no longer are in this country. So we flipped them the bird, right? And we said, well, thanks, we'll still bring it in, but how you use it, we will not honor. Right? Okay, we'll take the stuff, but your cultural tradition can go to hell. And that still stands today. And I think that we think that that's normal and not rude.
Yeah, I certainly grew up being like, okay, medicine, without knowing or believing that, no, literally it's medicine. We just chose to drink it recreationally. And in fact, the birth of spirits, which I didn't mention, came purely out of alchemy, purely in preservation of medicine mindset. And distilled spirits were created directly and distinctly as medicines, and not even mentioned as recreational beverages for hundreds of years. All of the early distillation manuals are medical formularies. There's nothing like this tastes good. That doesn't happen for hundreds of years. And probably almost all the way to the 1800s, we just, I at least had believed that it was like wink, wink, nod, nod, this whiskey is medicine, when in fact, this whiskey was medicine we just chose to enjoy recreationally. And I think similarly to what you were saying, Duncan, as far as botanical liqueurs and bitters, Angostura bitters, for example, against seasickness and tropical diseases, and we use those now as a spice to spice up our cocktails. But they're
not as is intended, quite frankly.
Yeah, exactly. Off-label use is our recreational use of things like chartreuse and Angostura bitters.
And it feels like we all sort of agree, like, well, that is its use. And I don't know, because I haven't visited every other country in the world, and I haven't been to Angostura, for example, or but how it was intended originally, how it was created was something, other. Like it really was intended, as, hey, perhaps by the doctor.
Yeah. And what we're seeing now, chartreuse in particular, it's a liqueur made in France, made still by Carthusian monks. The color chartreuse is named for this liqueur. It's that world famous for a long time, created as a medicine. Many monasteries during the later Middle Ages and early modern period sold medicinal beverages. There's still a version of chartreuse that's sold in the pharmacy in France. And then the green chartreuse and yellow chartreuse that we drink in cocktails, those were spin-offs. Those are table liqueurs, table elixirs, versions of that. And so we've chosen, and I think the producers of these products are like, sure, drink it like you want it, we can sell more. But why chartreuse has been in the news is because the monks have now pushed back and said,
Right.
this is now taking away from our religious observation. We're making as much as we're going to make. We're not increasing quantities from this point on. A very anti-capitalist and bold move for anyone to take. And it's kind of, to me, increases the magic of this liqueur chartreuse, which has recipe dating to 1603. And the fact that the people who make it are like, okay, we've done enough. We're going to keep it at this level. It's very much respect for the product, maybe as medicine, but maybe just as a product of their history as producing medicine for the people of France.
Great, we're,
Thank you.
thank you. Everyone on Zoom could totally hear everything you had to say. So it's great, we didn't have to repeat everything. We're past the top of the hour, so we're gonna wrap up, but there is a fun question, I think, here on Zoom about hot toddies, which you didn't really talk about at all, but
There's a lot
people
more in the
make
book.
hot, it's in the book, so get the book. Hot toddies, people make hot toddies when they have the cold or the flu, you all know that. Are there any other drinks today that are still used medicinally, quote unquote, like hot toddies?
Oh, yeah, I think, well, people, particularly people from non-American cultures who live in this country will often have, and America's still kind of the melting pot, have a lot of family traditions, and they're very fascinating depending on where people are from. Italians have a lot of very specific traditions. People from Asia have a lot of very opposite traditions around alcohol and medicine there. The hot toddy was always used for the flu, the Spanish flu in particular. By the way, it's no longer called the Spanish flu. That is improper terminology. It is the 1919 global flu epidemic. We don't assign the flu to any one culture. But
Here.
people said, commenting on the use of it in 1920-ish in America, the only thing we could give to people to soothe them was a hot toddy. And there's a very poignant quote about that, as far as its use to soothe but not cure any disease.
Great. Last question here in the audience, or we'll wrap up. Okay,
Got
John,
arm wrestle.
arm wrestle.
You
John,
mentioned the syrup in Pisco Punch, and you mentioned it sort of coming from 1900 on. Do you think that really a pineapple syrup would have been used in the early years, 1860, 1870? Or is that possibly just the introduction of pineapples from Hawaii after the the development of the pineapple industry in Hawaii? Because it doesn't impress me as actually the best use of Pisco. I think that there must have been something different. And I'm not saying about cocaine part. but do you think that might have been something that came back?
You think it doesn't work with the ingredients, or where's the ingredient coming from?
Well, the two things. I was not impressed with the pineapple syrup in that drink, but
In this drink in particular.
but I'm wondering if that may have been a popularization after the
I
Hawaiian
don't.
Islands.
I actually don't know the history of the
The
pineapple very
pineapple
well.
was really developed, I think, in the late.
The history of the pineapple begins in old San Francisco as the symbol of hospitality. Okay, this is the richest, fastest growing city in the history of the world. And people used to put pineapples in the windows of shops because they would import them, not from South America, but from the East Indies, India, etc. And you put them in as though we have something amazing to show. And so that you would put this amazing creation in your window as a shop to say, oh my God, come on in. And then you would cut it up and put it in a goddamn cocktail? That's absurd. And that is why the Pisco Punch was the most expensive cocktail in the world, 25 cents. All right. It was an utter risk to what Campbell was talking about at the Bank Exchange Saloon. They put it in the cocktail and it was a, hey, come on in.
But it was a slice of pineapple.
No, sir. No, well,
had to
listen,
make-
I wasn't there, okay? And I think we have to say that they didn't have knives and cutting boards then, right? I think that, I don't know what tool by which they introduced it in, but we do know that the pineapple as the symbol of hospitality and luxury happened here in the gold rush. And this bar put it in a goddamn cocktail and folks paid for it. And the other thing that Camper's been talking about, well, that was also true. I agree with
I just mean concept of the syrup, that's what interests.
was it a syrup or an infusion? I don't know.
We don't know.
But
None of us were
in
there.
this episode,
You know, Camper talked about it. He went to his grave with the recipe. You know,
what is that episode of what was it, Joy? in Britain. There was an episode in one of the Austin.
Well, because great houses had something attached to,
Yeah, they would have a greenhouse.
Called the pinery,
Yeah.
and you would grow a pineapple under
And apparently there was a
under
rock
gray
one.
skies.
There was a rock one because it didn't survive the greenhouse properly. And in early 19th century Britain, there's an episode in one of those Jane Austen
yeah.
takeoffs. Maybe it's in San, one of those things. There's this pineapple.
It's good for
It was shown to be this wonderful thing. It was wrong. Because it hadn't traveled far.
Yeah, there's
You didn't eat it, you just looked at it.
the history of fruit and citrus is its own fascinating thing. When I looked at the pineapple, I did a quick Google for this book and I was like, it seems more like ornamental. It's the international, it's a global symbol for hospitality. And that's how we in the booze industry recognize pineapple as very symbolic. It's also delicious, but because nothing came up medicinal in my first like 5 minutes of looking, I didn't pursue it further than that. But I have enjoyed drinking it.
Do you want a final comment over there
Yeah,
before we
I'm a
wrap up?
longtime member of California Rare Fruit Growers, where we studied the origins of where we get mangoes and papayas and pineapples, etc. The hospitality goes all the way back to Massachusetts and Vermont, where the sailors would bring them back as an astonishing example of exotic fruits. And I even have a flag at home, which is just simply a red background with a yellow silhouette of a pineapple on it, which was flown as a similar invitation. Come over, we have a pineapple. Because our son-in-law just got back from the Caribbean.
That's great.
Well, I mean, we could talk about pineapples all night, I think, as we have been, but let's wrap up by just being thankful that none of us here in the room have scurvy, because we all had a pisco punch tonight. We encourage everyone at home to also go grab a citrus and make sure you don't have scurvy as well. We'll take this moment to thank our presenter, Camper English, for joining us tonight. Come back in the frame so we can see you.
Thank you.
And thank you all for attending this Book Club of California program here, either in person. Thank you for joining us. We still have some beverages up on the bar. If you'd like one before you leave, we kept them out for you. If you are joining us on Zoom, thank you for joining us. We're sorry you can't participate in our specialty cocktail. But we hope that you will join us for our next in-person and virtual program, which will be Monday, May 15th at 6 p.m. It's the annual Oscar Lewis Awards ceremony, where we will celebrate Richard Siebert for his achievement in the book arts and Dorothy Lazard for her achievement in Western history here in the book club in San Francisco, but also on Zoom. You can register for this program online at bccbooks.org/programs or in any of the emails that you might be getting from the Book Club of California. So thanks everyone for joining us in person or online. We hope to see you again. Have a great evening. Be well and take care of yourself and someone else if you can. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.